February 1935, 300,000 people across South Wales joined marches and rallies. The government caved in. The standstill order was rushed through.
Unemployed people can now claim benefit under the new rules, or the old ones, or whichever works out best.
A huge victory, but people wanted the means test abolished altogether. In Blaina and Nantaglo, the relieving officer was being deliberately overzealous in making savings on benefits, withholding money he could have given that was desperately needed. Also, there was no appointment system to see him, so people had to wait about all day. In Nantaglo, shopkeepers and schoolchildren went on strike. A vast crowd marched to the Public Assistance Committee offices, and a paper was delivered demanding a new benefit without a means test. 10 days later, County Councillor Phil Abraham led a deputation to the offices in Blaina. No one would talk to him.
If 12 people won't move them, 12,000 may.
Newsletters and leaflets spread the word. There would be a mass protest march to the Blaina offices in 2 weeks' time. A committee was formed. Meetings were held. Slogans were chalked on pavements and walls. Then, 3 days before the march, Police Inspector Davis told Phil Abraham and his committee that the march was banned. He demanded they call it off. They refused. The march now took on a new meaning. Were people to be banned from demonstrating? Where was freedom of speech? The morning of the march, 11 o'clock. Inspector Davis agrees that the march can go ahead to Central Park. 12 people will then be escorted by the police to the offices. 4:30. Inspector Davis returns with the Deputy Chief Constable, Superintendent Baker. The march is now banned. Too many marchers from outside Blaina are expected. He declares,
"Any trouble which occurs will be the marchers' responsibility."
It is too late. In Abertillery, people had already gathered outside Unity Hall in Queen Street.
There were thousands of us, women with babies, old men, young men, marching to Blaina.
They were stopped by 2 lines of police. One of the leaders of the march told the crowd,
"The march is not allowed. We'd all better disperse and then take a walk to Blaina."
Avoiding the police on the main road, the marchers broke into small groups and continued their way to Blaina.
I don't think anyone turned back.
The Abertillery people collected outside this building, Salem Chapel, where the Blaina marchers were also now gathered. They were in a good-natured mood, and speakers told the crowd to remain peaceful. They all set off, chanting and singing the red flag and the Internationale. Meanwhile, marchers from Bryn Mawr and Nantaglo approached the offices from the opposite direction. They were stopped by police close to Blaina Inn. Superintendent Baker told them there was no one at the offices anyway. After a tense discussion, Baker ordered his police to draw their batons. The marchers moved back down the road to Bethel Chapel. The marchers from Blaina and Abertillery couldn't see the other marchers because of the bend, but they did see 60 to 70 policemen coming towards them from the Blaina Inn to block their way.
They were not drunk, but they weren't in the pub for nothing.
Superintendent Baker spoke to the leaders of the march. The police had marchers in front and behind and were seriously outnumbered. There are differing accounts of what happened next. The police version.
"The crowd was out of control. We were attacked with stones and sticks."
The marchers claimed,
"There was no disorder before we heard the police whistle."
whatever the reason, the police charged the crowd with their batons. People were knocked to the ground and kicked.
The police were like madmen.
There was all confusion and panic.
Marchers armed themselves with stones from gardens and tips and pelted the police, who briefly took cover before rushing into the crowd for a second time. People were struck down as they fled along roads and up the mountainside.
Women and children were injured, stretched out on the road.
Within minutes, it was over. 25 policemen and around 200 people were injured, some badly. Some had nothing to do with the march. The police started hunting down the ringleaders. The people of Blaina and Nantaglo closed ranks. At Garn Cross, Nantaglo, the the police found a group of men, among them Phil Abraham.
If it's a fight you want, we're now armed.
The police retreated, and there was no further violence. Subsequently, 18 men were charged with unlawful and riotous assembly, disturbing the peace, and great riot, an offence which could result in life imprisonment. Some of them were also charged with assault. Most had links with the Communist Party, feared by the authorities. There was huge local outrage at the behaviour of the police, and there were demands for an inquiry. The 9-day trial was at Monmouth. The defence claimed that no one could be accused of unlawful assembly because the Riot Act had not been read. The police admitted striking women and people as they ran away. One said,
I felt it was my duty to do so.
Another admitted,
Yes, I did hit people from behind. No, I could not be sure that they were all demonstrators. They might have been passers-by.
one policeman said the crowd was
hostile and disorderly as he left the Salem Chapel. He was singing the red flag.
The defence asked,
And the same crowd would not have been disorderly if they had been singing Land of Hope and Glory?
Oh no, sir.
61-year-old George Penry was accused of hitting a policeman with a hammer.
I didn't have a hammer. I wasn't even part of the march. I just got hit on the head and had to be taken to Blaina Hospital.
The defence asked the police if a hammer had been taken as evidence.
No.
George Penry was acquitted before the summing up because of
possible police error.
Stanley Corp was also accused of assaulting a police officer who was 6 foot 6 inches tall. Stanley Corp was not a large man. The defence declared,
If I were desirous of assaulting a policeman, I should select a small one.
in spite of all this and other inconsistencies in police evidence, the judge declared,
The police have not been guilty of any misconduct whatsoever.
On the 8th day, the jury gave their verdicts. Aneurin Bevan, MP for Ebble Vale, came to witness the proceedings. The jury found none of the 18 guilty of assault. 2 of them were found not guilty of any charge. 4 were found guilty of unlawful assembly and bound over. The sentencing of the others was left until the next day, so that the judge could receive advice from the Home Secretary, who recommended light sentences to avoid more trouble in South Wales. Phil Abraham was the first to be sentenced.
When he said 9 months, I laughed. I was relieved. I was looking forward to years.
3 others were also sentenced to 9 months. 7 received shorter sentences. They were driven to jail in a coach with the word Liberty on the side. Phil Abraham and the 3 others with the longest jail terms were released from Cardiff prison just before Christmas, after only 6.5 months.
We didn't want to leave Cardiff right then. The All Blacks were playing Wales. We had to get home though, because there were crowds of people waiting for us. And a brass band.
The Beveridge Report of 1942, which criticised means testing, led to the creation of the welfare state, a safety net against the despair of the 1930s. Means testing for unemployment benefit was at an end.